Well, the Prime Minister delivered a landmark speech yesterday in which she promised to walk the road of reform. It comes as Labor figures, including Graham Richardson, Paul Howes and Greg Combet, bemoan the government's inability to articulate a clear agenda. For more, we're going to cross to Canberra, where political editor Chris Uhlmann is joined by Labor's Amanda Rishworth and the Liberal Senator Gary Humphries.
Well, Gary Humphries, Amanda Rishworth, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Amanda, we'll begin with you. And in breaking news, of course, the ANZ has announced that it will lift its mortgage interest rate by 0.39%, which, of course, is above the Reserve Bank's lift of the cash rate. What do you make of that, Amanda Rishworth? Of course, the government has made it quite clear that it didn't want this to happen.
Well, look, this is very disappointing, a disappointing move by the ANZ Bank, and no doubt that people with mortgages will be very disappointed and angry about this. The Reserve Bank had made it clear that there was no excuse to raise interest rates above the official cash rate. So it is very disappointing, but the government is determined to improve competition in the banking sector, and we will do it methodically, but we are determined to actually make sure that there's better competition. Gary
Humphries?
Well, look, Chris, if ever there was going to be a rise in interest rates that could have been avoided, it should have been the one this week. I mean, you've got, you had Wayne Swan sort of pointing his finger at the banks and Julia Gillard saying how disappointed she was that the banks were doing this. If ever a bank was going to hold back on an increase, it should have been this week, but it hasn't happened. In fact, the rate rise has been higher than the recommendation from the Reserve Bank. Clearly, this government has no traction whatsoever with the banks. Its strategy of looking them in the eye and telling them to behave has failed, and it's time to look at other strategies, frankly. Joe Hockey's got a strategy on the table.
Gary, that's exactly what we are doing. We are looking at how we might. We've already started with actually cracking down on exit fees, unfair exit fees, and we will continue to roll out, as we flagged in October, to make sure that there is competition in the banking sector and to make sure that people can vote with their feet.
Well, 2 weeks ago, Joe Hockey put on the table the issue of doing something about banking practices that were anti-competitive. At the time, Wayne Swan didn't say, well, you're right, Joe, and here's what we're going to do. He simply attacked Joe for interfering in the marketplace. The fact is that Joe Hockey was ahead of the curve on that issue. He flagged the need for action by government. The government's playing catch-up at this point. And I don't think, frankly, Amanda, after 3 years in office, with this year 7 consecutive rises in interest rates, anyone really trusts the government to have a means of bringing down interest rates or containing them to RBA levels. You've clearly failed on that score. It's time to move to another agenda, and that's the one that Joe Hockey's advancing.
Well, look, what Joe Hockey did is jump up and down with a number of thought bubbles. First, he inferred that we should re-regulate interest rates, which would have made very difficult times for people trying to get a mortgage. Now he's come up with another thought bubble. He wanted to have a debate, a town hall debate about this. What the government is doing is working through this in a methodical way, but don't mistake the fact that we're working through this. We flagged it in October last year. We want to get this right, and we will do so. We are determined to get this right, and we will ensure that there's more competition within the banking sector.
Just to wrap this up, Gary Humphries, I know, wants to respond on the re-regulation of interest rates.
Yeah, look, I just don't trust the government. I think that we've seen lots of posturing and puffing out of chests and anger about this, but where's the action? I mean, there needs to be something hard on the table. I predict that when the government announces its plans for doing something about interest rates, it'll borrow extensively from the issues that Joe Hockey's already put on the table, which I think demonstrates that it's the Liberals who are setting the agenda on this, not Labor.
All right, well, we'll move on. The Prime Minister made a major speech yesterday in Adelaide, in fact, Amanda Rishworth, where you're coming to us from, and she talked about her vision for Australia, and she said that a strong economy and opportunity for all, that's really it in a nutshell. Isn't that something that almost anyone in politics would agree with?
Well, look, what she's been very clear about is that she does want to see a strong economy, but wants to make sure that there's opportunity for all, not some. Now, that is something that is inherently Labor values. And if you look at our last record, whether it be our extra investment in education or whether it be our reinvestment in the public hospital sector. Now, let's keep in mind that the Liberal Party did take $1 billion out of the public hospital sector. we see that investing in public health is critically important to give people that opportunity. But if we look at a strong economy, when she's talking about a strong economy, she definitely talks about the role that government plays in that. Now, if we look at the role that the Labor government has played when we were looking down the barrel of a global economic financial crisis, it was the Labor government that was wanting to step in and actually stimulate the economy. If it had been up to the Liberal Party, then nothing would have happened. Well, if we look at where we look at prosperity for the future, when we look at investment in our productivity, then the government once again is stepping in to actually play a role in building our national broadband network. And if we look at that further, about looking at that opportunity for all, there's a stark difference between the Liberal Party and the Labor Party when we look at actually getting prosperity. And I'll just finish on this, that I do think that work choices is an example where, while we have a strong economy, we need to make sure that there's fairness in the system, that ordinary people get fairness in their local workplaces.
Gary Humphries,
I do think...
Sorry, Amanda, we will just finish there for a minute. Gary Humphries, a strong economy and an opportunity for all. That's a nutshell for you as well.
Well, of course it is. I mean, what political party wouldn't embrace those issues? I mean, this is blandness writ large. The fact is, this is more, presentation of a very sort of neutral kind of agenda from the Prime Minister when she lacks substance, she lacks a real agenda. There are a host of Labor Party people today saying publicly, which is unusual for this party, that there are problems with the government lacking an agenda for change. Graham Richardson said this week in launching Paul Howe's book, where's the agenda? You've got to find an agenda sooner or later. And that's the truth of the matter. That the government, can talk about all these wonderful things it's going to do, but so far we have 3 years of a broken promise landscape and 3 years in front of us when we just don't know what the government's actually going to deliver of the promises that it's made, thin as they might be.
All right, before we go back to Amanda, what does the Liberal Party stand for in the 21st century? How are you uniquely different from the Labor Party?
Well, we demonstrated a willingness to actually confront the problems. I mean, when it came to, say, border protection, we didn't pussyfoot around this issue. We've always maintained, stop the business of the people smugglers, we'll stop the flow of boats across the sea. We had a very clear position, so clear that the government had to borrow that position leading up to the last election. We've always had a view about balanced budgets and strong economies, and we delivered that over the 12 years we were last in government. Labor has only delivered budget deficit after budget deficit, debt rising all the time. I mean, our agenda is what we've done in government. That's what we've proved.
So, Amanda Rishworth, what does make the Labor Party unique in politics? How is it different from the Liberal Party?
Well, I believe that the Labor Party is a progressive party. It's a progressive party that looks towards the future. And when we looking at the future, the Labor Party is talking about setting a price on carbon, where the Liberal Party is saying do nothing. The Conservative side of politics is saying let's just do nothing on that issue. When we're looking at how we improve our nation's productivity, we're saying the private sector has failed in delivering fast, effective broadband across this nation. The government's going to play a role in not just ensuring productivity today, but for the future. A progressive party must look towards the future, but we also must make sure that we are providing opportunity, as Julia Gillard said, for all. Now, the Liberal Party can say, oh yes, we like opportunity for all, but why didn't they invest in education, giving our most disadvantaged kids the opportunity to gain a good education
we did actually,
and take
Amanda,
a passport?
But can you really call yourself a progressive party when you're losing votes hand over fist to the Greens because you simply aren't acting on the traditional social agenda of the Labor Party, and you have a major problem which your own members are identifying day by day as a lack of direction and a lack of focus on Labor's fundamentals. John Faulkner said, you're perceived in the community as being long on cunning, short on courage. That's not the sign of a progressive party. It's a sign of a party which is adrift because it hasn't got its values clear and it isn't acting on those values. The reason Tony Abbott won so well, he did so well in this election, in my opinion, it's just gone, it's because he had a clear vision and he had a clear sense of values, which Julia Gillard lacked.
Well, look, Gary, that's just not the case. Tony Abbott only articulated what he was against, not what he was for. And in fact, since the election, we've seen a number of coalition spokespeople come out hearing tensions within your own party about where you're going with bank regulation. I mean, I think that Tony Abbott only articulated, and the Liberal Party only continues to articulate what they're opposed, not what they're for. So I would disagree entirely. Whereas the Labor Party is getting on with the job. Part of Julia Gillard's speech was to articulate where we're going into the future, to talk about fairness, to talk about sustainability, to talk about developing a strong economy.
Amanda, but just to address that question that Gary Humphries raised, though, do you think that you've got a real problem on the left flank of the Labor Party where you are losing votes to the Greens?
Well, look, there's no doubt that at the last election the seat of Melbourne was won by the Greens, and Julia Gillard has made clear that she sees an important role is for the Labor Party to articulate its values, to prosecute arguments in big policy reform. But to say that the rise of a third party, such as the Greens, is a new phenomena, it's not. And in fact, the Democrats, were for a while the third force in politics, stealing votes off the Liberal Party and off the Labor Party. And in fact, my seat of Kingston was under threat from the Democrats under the candidate Janine Haynes. So it isn't necessarily a new phenomena, but we as the Labor Party do have to articulate our values and do have to articulate what we stand for. We will do that. The Liberal Party needs to do the same. They can't just sit there and be obstructionists and oppose everything.
Well, we'll see what happens in this Parliament, but my opinion is that what the community is seeing is a government without an agenda. On things like emissions trading, we're seeing the whole question of what to do about emissions pushed off to a committee which won't report for a year or so. We're seeing issues like the border protection issue pushed off to a process which will take at least 2 years to resolve. The big questions are not being addressed. And that's the reason that people are getting uncomfortable. That's the reason that the Labor Party's polling is falling. That's the reason that people are saying, where's the agenda? And it's not my opinion, it's the opinion of Labor Party members coming out there and saying there's a major problem. And it's true, there is a major problem with Labor articulating where it's heading in this Parliament.
Amanda Rishworth, in the words of the Prime Minister, in a nutshell, a response to that?
Well, look, quite frankly, we do have a strong agenda for the future. The Prime Minister is going to outline that. But one thing I would say is that solutions to these complex problems are not established in a day or in a week. We are going
in 3 years?
Despite despite pressure from deadlines, we want to work through these and get these right. And so that is why we will work through these. And the Prime Minister has stated she wants to be judged on major reforms that she delivers in months and years, not in days.
Well, Amanda Rishworth, we're going to have to leave it there, so thank you. And Gary Humphries, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Well, now to